Welcome to Alpha Kappa Psi's webinar titled It Starts From Within, Improving Recruitment and Retention. My name is Mackenzie Lauka, and I serve AK Psi as the Associate Director of Education. I will be your moderator. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few logistics regarding the audio and web-based features of today's program. In order to verify attendance, you should have linked to the GoToWebinar meeting room through the web link provided in your confirmation email. To access the PowerPoint handout, click the plus sign next to Handouts on your screen. Click the name of the handout to download the file so you can follow along. This webinar will be advanced remotely. At the end of the program, I'll explain how you can ask a question to our presenter. If you have a question throughout the program, feel free to type it into the question box on your screen or tweet it using the hashtag AKPsiChat. Your questions will be asked at the end of the program in the order they're received. After the webinar has ended, a link to the recording will be emailed to you so you can review the webinar at a later point. Be sure to also check out our social media content. Portions of today's program will be tweeted using the hashtag AKPsiChat. You may also find some valuable resources on the AK Psi blog, Facebook page, Instagram feed, LinkedIn page, Twitter feed, and our YouTube channel, all of which can be accessed from the akpsi.org homepage. The growth and success of a chapter stems from its ability to recruit and retain passionate and dedicated brothers. Success in recruitment and retention begins with taking a look in the mirror and starting from within. Speaking from experience, the former president of the Omega Kappa chapter is going to share how his chapter struggled with recruitment and retention, how they're able to turn a small, struggling chapter into a large, thriving chapter, and how your chapter can do the same. In addition to covering these topics, we'll leave time for your questions and comments on the subject matter. For our program today, we have one presenter who's going to provide guidance and support while also provoking thoughts and awareness so you walk away from today's program with new insight on the topic. At this point, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Patrick St. Clair is a recent graduate from Towson University, where he served 2 years as the president of the Omega Kappa chapter. During his first 3 semesters in this position, the chapter almost tripled in size while increasing its retention rate. During his 3.5 years as student member, Patrick also served as Master of Rituals and is a 2015 Academy Fellow. As a professional, Pat works at Ellen & Tucker as a tax associate, and he is now the chapter advisor for the Rosai chapter at Johns Hopkins University. Building off his 2016 PBLI presentation in Alexandria, Pat hopes to provide insight by sharing the accomplishments and downfalls his chapter faced with recruitment and retention. Now to get started with the presentation, I'll hand it off to Patrick.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and thank you all for joining us today. I want to begin by describing a problem that many chapters experience at some point, and some of you may be experiencing right now, and it's probably why you're watching this webinar. The problem is low turnout for recruitment. The Omega Kappa chapter was facing this problem going into the 2014 fall semester. We felt the pressure that many face to have the suggested pledge class size and to make sure the chapter didn't disappear, which resulted in us accepting almost anyone, and people getting in who probably shouldn't have. And then when you got a bid, it didn't feel like a big deal, because almost anyone who tried got one. This gave us new brothers who never really bought in to our values and purpose or took the fraternity seriously. Because of that, we had a chapter of fair weather brothers who turned and ran when things got hard or when it wasn't convenient for them to be active. And with these low retention rates, it killed the chapter's pride. And without pride, nobody saw a reason to join, which led to, you guessed it, low recruitment turnout, and it puts us back at the start of this cycle. I would bet that many of you recognize some, if not all, of these problems from seeing them appear in your own chapter. And looking at the poll results, that is absolutely true. Oftentimes, it seems like we are constantly putting out fires, solving one problem just as another one arises. We get caught in this cycle that frustrates us and drains the chapter's energy without really seeing meaningful results. So how do you stop this cycle? You simply get off the ride. You take a step back and you look at the whole picture, much like we just did with describing the Omega Kappa chapter's problems. When my executive board and I looked at this problem, we saw some deeper underlying issues. The first issue we saw was we didn't know who we were as a chapter. If you had asked all 34 members what the culture or mission of the chapter was, you would have gotten 34 different answers. This led to a whole different set of problems. Since we didn't know who we didn't know what we were selling, and we certainly didn't know what our target market was. So we simply targeted everyone, which was a waste of resources. And people pledged without having an accurate view of what they were joining because they were getting sold 34 different chapters. Then, as pledges became brothers, they were all expecting different things, and we didn't know what they were. On top of all of that, we didn't know what exactly we were currently providing because, once again, we didn't know who we were, and then the cycle would repeat. Looking at it this way, it's easy to see how all of these service problems were stemming from not knowing who we were as a chapter. Another reason we couldn't stop that cycle was because, beyond not knowing what brothers wanted, we didn't know what we were capable of offering. And this may seem like the same problem, but there's a difference between knowing what you offer and knowing what you can offer. And it's about knowing what your membership is made of. So once again, we took a step back to look at the bigger picture, to analyze the cycle, and then dive down to the true cause. And this is really what I want to drive home. We could have said, we are having bad recruitment. Let's do better. Let's do better marketing. Let's have better events. We could have fought the many fires I mentioned in the previous slide, but they would just keep coming back. Instead, we opted to take the time to find the roots of our problems and address them. We believed if we focused within and fixed ourselves, more effective recruitment and higher retention would follow. In our case, the root of the problem was our lack of an identity. And once we found that, we believed the rest would follow. Quick side note, before we move on and start addressing this, I wanted to make a note on how our executive board had time for all of these discussions. Simply, we worked during the summer. The entire executive board went on a weekend retreat out into the woods. It was there that we were not only able to have in-depth discussions, but we bonded as a team. So when things got rough during the school year, we were tackling it not only as leaders of the chapter, but as that team. And I could never imagine running a chapter without having that time as an executive board. I strongly advocate that your chapter look into it if it doesn't already. And maybe not even just for your executive board, but for your entire chapter. So, back to the task at hand. What is the identity of a chapter? In my opinion, it's a combination of 5 key components. The first being the mission. What is your role on campus? Why does your chapter exist? Then the goal. How are you fulfilling that role stated in your mission? The culture. What is the common drive between brothers? For this, try to think of a statement that can be applied to every brother in your chapter. Competitive edge. What value do you provide that others don't? Why should I join your organization instead of every other organization on campus? And the final one, value. What return on investment does a brother get for being involved? And this is the most important and often most overlooked element of a chapter, and it directly affects your retention rates. So to help illustrate this and give it some more substance, let's look at some possible examples for these for Alpha Kappa Psi at the international level. Mission. What's the role in the world? Why does it exist? While it's not our mission per se, Alpha Kappa Psi's vision is to be recognized as a premier developer of principled business leaders. The goal. How is it fulfilling that role? The goals are exemplified in the objects of Alpha Kappa Psi: to further the individual welfare of its members, to foster scientific research in the fields of commerce, accounts, and finance, to educate the public to appreciate and demand higher ideals therein, and to promote and advance in institutions of college rank courses leading to degrees in business. The culture. What statement can be applied to all brothers? After some thought, what I came up with is Alpha Kappa Psi brothers are eager to improve and connect. Competitive edge. What separates it from other professional business organizations? Something I found on the website is Alpha Kappa Psi is a unique, prestigious association of students, professors, graduates, and professionals with common interests and goals. And finally, the value of Alpha Kappa Psi. What return on investment does it provide its members? Alpha Kappa Psi offers educational resources, such as the webinar you're watching right now, PBLI, the Academy, the College of Leadership at Convention, and direct experience, such as running an organization, as well as access to a network of professionals, both in and out of college, ready to be a partner in your success. While the identity of Alpha Kappa Psi as a fraternity is well defined on the global level, the identity for each chapter is unique, and it must be discovered and created at the chapter level. As we get started discussing how to create an identity, the most important thing to realize is that it takes time. You can't force it, and it isn't going to happen overnight. You can guide it and push it along, but if you don't have buy-in from the chapter as a whole, it's not going to stick. Remember, a chapter is not just its executive board or its leaders, and while they may be the ones who are leading the discussions, they should not be the ones making a decision on what the chapter is as a whole. So with that in mind, let's talk about how you can tackle this in your chapter. The first step in figuring out your identity is analyzing. Just like in business, you need to study your environment and how you fit in, doing things like a SWOT analysis survey of your chapter, visiting other chapters and seeing how they operate, talking with anyone who interacts with your chapter, such as faculty or community members. All of these pieces will help give you an idea on how you are being perceived, as well as insights on the members of your chapter, your internal and external identity. If you are happy with that perception, that identity, you may not have as much work as you might think. But if people's perceptions are far from where you want them to be, it at least gives you a starting point for moving forward. At Omega Kappa, we did a lot of this analysis at our summer retreat and during the first few weeks of school. Once you have the information from the analysis and observations, it's time to start talking. At our executive board retreat, we talked about this and what we came up with on our exercises and discussed for hours around a campfire. We came away from that weekend with a great basis for chapter-wide conversations. I did get some questions at PBLI about how I made sure that the chapter members' voices were heard. Simply, the executive board didn't make decisions. I say we came with a basis. We came out with an idea, some guides to have these conversations. And also, this is where you see some benefit from being at a smaller size, because we were able to have a combination of structured talks at chapter meetings and informal ones between brothers so that everybody was heard. To give you an example of this on how I facilitated the conversations is I opened up my apartment one night to anyone who wanted to come talk about Omega Kappa chapter. I would have someone spit out a topic, and then we would talk about it. And as things were said, they were written down on a massive post-it note board until we thought we had grasped how everyone felt and were able to come to a consensus. When the topic was done, the page was stuck to the wall, and we moved on. I also made an effort, personally, to talk very little. As leaders, and especially of those who are either the president or another influential voice in the chapter, you need to realize that sometimes your voice can drown out others, whether it be intentional or not. I saw my role as a guide, to make sure we stayed on track, but not to control the content being said. And I asked other e-board members in attendance to behave in the same way, so that the general membership had their chance to be heard. At the end of the night, we looked over the pages covering the wall, and everyone felt that we had come to some great conclusions as a chapter. Beyond that, I would have random heart-to-hearts with brothers. I would walk up to them in the hallways and ask, who are we? Who do we want to be? What do you want to be known for? And while these questions seem silly, they have to be answered. And as word spread that I would have these heart-to-hearts, brothers looked forward to them and had put in forethought to their answers. Additionally, we sent out a very extensive survey using SurveyMonkey that gave us some quantitative data to work with. And what you need to realize is the analyze and the talk stage of identity often happen together. You'll get information and you'll talk about it. You'll get more information and you'll talk about it. It's a growing, evolving process. But as these questions started to get answered at the chapter level, it then fell on leadership to lead by example. You have to exemplify the identity, live it, breathe it, and believe in it. So the chapter was involved in the decision. The hope is that they will have the buy-in to follow you, and the identity will start to form. Of course, there will be those that don't buy in and refuse to change. However, it is a chapter as a whole, and if the chapter as a whole truly believes that this is the right way to go, then those naysayers may no longer be a good fit. When we went through this change, we lost 5 brothers, going from 34 to 29. But those 29 were passionate, driven, proud, and fully committed. These are the ones who attended the conversations the nights in my apartment and completed the survey. Those are the people who exemplified our identity and the ones we wanted to have in our chapter to help us grow and move forward. Creating and maintaining an identity is a never-ending process. As membership changes, so does the identity, and it's the leadership's role to make sure you always have a finger on the chapter's pulse in order to adapt as a chapter evolves. To give you an idea of how long this initial effort took to pan out, I met with my executive board once a month during the summer of 2014, which is where we first started discussing all of this. That August was when we went camping for a weekend and really hammered out what we were seeing and what we would like to see. September and October involved more data collection, the analyzing, the talking, and this is where we had the informal discussions with brothers and sent out the survey we created. On top of getting info from the chapter, I also took a mini AK side tour, visiting a handful of chapters around the area to see how they operate and study their identities. That way, when the chapter had a problem, I could offer a tangible solution from another chapter. November and December was the launch, and at one of the last meetings of the semester, I gave a presentation called Brotherhood ROI that basically summarized the findings, gave some form to this identity that we had been creating, and then presented some tangible changes that were going to take place as a result. So, it takes time and work. This is not a simple thing, but if you put in the effort, the results are well worth it. Once you have this new identity, it's important to make it well known who you are, what you stand for, and what you offer as a chapter. This will start to develop your external identity on campus and change the perception of the chapter from where it was. That will in turn start to bring the right people out to recruitment. We start to see how this all comes together. Ones that want to be there and who fit the identity you've created. And throughout this entire process, the chapter will gain a sense of pride. And pride is the greatest recruiter you can have. People want to be part of something that they can be proud of. And the last step is recruiting, which we'll touch on in greater detail in a second. But to give you an example and to show you that it works, I want to share with you the identity of Omega Kappa chapter using those 5 elements we talked about earlier. Before I do, I want to remind you that it is still an evolving discussion, as any identity should be. But I feel confident in describing our current identity in the following ways. Our mission, the role on campus and why we exist, is to teach professionalism and leadership to Towson. Our goal, how we're fulfilling that role, is to train students who have a passion for both and give them opportunities to use those skills. Our culture, the statement that describes us all, is a diverse journey to success. Our competitive edge, what sets us apart, is combining the best of both worlds, a professional organization with the lifelong family and social side of Greek life. The continuing value we provide brothers, basically why should they pay dues and give up their time, is we are a great environment to fail in, meaning that this is the place to try new things and step out of your comfort zone. If you fall, you have your brothers to catch you and support you. You can try without the fear of being fired. I feel extremely proud of this identity for a few reasons. First, it's honest. We are selling exactly who we are, and we'll talk about why that's so important later. And second, because it's unique to us. Third, because it was a group effort, and it's a testament to what our chapter is capable of when we work together. As you work on creating this identity, you'll find that certain elements will be harder than others to define. For us, we were extremely diverse in every possible way, from major, age, ethnicity, and even future goals. But the competitive edge was easy because we are the only professional business fraternity on campus. We're a chapter like Omega Theta at University of Maryland, who has at least 3 professional business Greek organizations, might find it harder to define competitive edge, but easier to define value because of their phenomenal network and programming. With our newfound identity and drive, we were able to tackle recruitment. As I mentioned, finding and creating our identity helped us improve our recruitment as we developed a sense of pride in who we were and knowing who we wanted to bring into our chapter. But just knowing your identity isn't going to make your recruitment change overnight or assist with retention without some extra effort. So let's dive a little deeper into what worked and didn't work for us and what you might be able to implement in your chapter. Many of these changes were made in that fall 2014 semester, And for those of you paying attention, you would realize that this is before a lot of the work had been done on creating this new identity. What I found was just the work we did over the summer sparked a massive change in the chapter. People saw that things were changing. They saw an executive board that was putting in a lot of time and effort to really make an impact. And the executive board got excited because they were actually doing something meaningful, something that would have a lasting impact. At that first chapter meeting, the room was buzzing. This alone created pride and also excitement, which we then harnessed for recruitment and helped enact 3 main goals, or rules, we had going into the fall. Rule number 1, be honest. You have to be true to your identity instead of selling a chapter that doesn't exist. You can't trick Rashees. They will find out the truth when they join, and if they figure that you sold them a lie, they're going to resent it. But here are some tangible ways where we were honest recruiters. First, at a chapter meeting, we went around and shared why we think someone should join Alpha Kappa Psi. If somebody shared something that we thought wasn't based in fact, I asked them to elaborate, and then if we still had hesitations, we shared them and explained and decided as a group whether or not that would be a selling point. We also start every single recruitment season with an information session. This is where we give a unified vision on what Alpha Kappa Psi is as a whole, what the Omega Kappa chapter is, how recruitment works, how pledging works, and some of the things you can expect as a brother. In reality, this is for the brothers just as much as interested students, because we wanted everyone to be selling the same chapter rather than 34 different versions of it. And this is a good way to get everyone on the same page. And in hindsight, it would have been great to do this at a chapter meeting so that truly everyone would see it. We have one image being sold. As honest recruiters, what we didn't do anymore is sell things we didn't have. I can still remember pledging and being told that we had, quote, a great alumni base that helps us get jobs. And while I would hope we have that, at the time it simply wasn't true. Omega Kappa just turned 10 years old this past spring, and many of the alumni when I pledged were still young professionals, and our network was not that vast. There were instances that alumni got brothers opportunities, but it was not as often as they made it sound. And when I joined and found the truth, I had some resentment because it was definitely a huge selling point for me. A positive note, however, is I've seen an upswing in opportunities from alumni as the pride in the chapter has grown from all these efforts, which is just another benefit to the work. That ties into our next goal, be proud. For the first time since joining the organization, I was truly proud of who we were because I finally knew who we were. There was a lot that our chapter changed in this aspect, from the little things like pushing wearing letters more during recruitment to creating better t-shirt designs that were more appealing that people actually wanted to wear. We also provided more opportunities at events for brothers, general members, to share their experience. This gave potential new members the image that it's not just the recruitment chairs and leaders that are excited about the chapter, but that everyone has pride and buy-in. We also gave bids based off of quality without regards to numbers. We made the decision to only initiate those who really wanted to be there, even if it meant having small pledge classes, those that should be there. We were more critical during deliberations, and I held the results of the votes until the end so the results from one wouldn't sway the rest. What I found was when we would go a stretch of denying 4 students bids, almost instantaneously the 5th person got in because we panicked that we wouldn't have a pledge class. By holding results, each vote was based off of merit and merit alone. Our third goal was to be awkward. And what I mean by this is not being afraid to talk to people, to give an elevator pitch to a class, and to grab those walking past your table. The worst thing they are going to say is no. We would target principal classes, principals of marketing, of accounting, classes with mostly freshmen and sophomores, and give an elevator pitch at the beginning of the class. We wouldn't let someone walk past our tables and not talk to them, even if it was only a hello, followed by the quick I'm not interested. A great example of this is Candace Brinkley, who was our recruitment chair last semester. When she did tabling, she did it right. She wouldn't stand behind the table, but rather in front of it, and when somebody walked by, she stepped directly into their walking path, reached out her hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Candace. Do you have 30 seconds to hear about Alpha Kappa Psi?" This led to numerous awkward interactions, which I loved watching, but it also led to an incredibly large list of interested students. And I found that having an identity and being proud of it made it easier to be awkward. By recruiting this way, we had pledges who wanted to be there for the right reasons, and larger numbers that allowed us to be more selective. These two things combined created brothers who have truly bought into our core values and our mission. After that, it came down to staying focused on the value that you described as part of your identity. Retention comes naturally as brothers will continue to connect to the mission, the reason they joined, and then see value in their membership. Looking at the poll results, a lot of you do promotional marketing, tabling, and wearing letters, all showing pride. Marketing is a great way to show your identity, making sure you have the true characteristics of the things you've created as your chapter, making sure you're selling the right image and targeting the right market. So, I've shared with you our problem, I shared with you our plan, and I shared with you how we executed that plan. So what do we have to show for it? As I mentioned earlier, after some brothers left, we had 29 active brothers at the start of the 2014 fall semester. And we had been losing brothers every semester up until then. Just 3 semesters later, we ended the fall 2015 semester with 82 active brothers, and you can see our retention rate grew as well. But some other really cool things happened as a result of our rebranding. That fall semester, as we were figuring out our identity, we bought in one of the best pledge classes I've seen to date, with the exception of my own, of course. They saw our excitement during recruitment. They saw all the effort we were making to improve our chapter. As a pledge class, they couldn't wait to join a group that puts in so much effort into improving themselves. They saw excitement and pride and wanted to be a contributing part of it. Going through this process also helped us have other tough conversations down the road. As the university, the state, and even the country has had underlying racial tensions starting to grow and manifest, we have been able to have open discussions about diversity, privilege, and wanting to get to know someone's background before profiling them. We were able to do this because of the experience we gained talking about our own identity. One thing I didn't get to present on during PBLI is what do you do when things go wrong? In a very ironic turn of events, the spring 2016 semester, when I presented at PBLI, we had just had one of our worst retention rates in the recent history of our chapter. Over 20% of our chapter who could have returned from the previous fall did not. That's because during that fall semester, we didn't do a good job providing that value, that return on investment. And there were reasons for that, but instead I want to focus on how we moved forward and hopefully provide you with some ideas that may work for your chapter when things go wrong. The first step to rebounding from a bad semester is admitting, wow, that was a bad semester. Identify the problem. As president, I did it in front of everyone at the first chapter meeting by addressing the elephant in the room. I assured them that leadership was aware of it and that it was bad and that we were not okay with that level of performance and that we were going to do better. Things will improve. Then we went back to where we started and asked, why did we have a bad semester? And again, we digged deep. We went for that root cause. So don't stop at the first reason you find, but search for that deeper underlying issue. And when you think you've found it, share it with the leadership and the chapter and offer and ask for ways the chapter can improve. Get input. If your problem was like ours and you didn't provide value, make sure you're asking people what value is wanted. I found a great way of doing this. At a chapter meeting, I passed out index cards and pens to everybody in the room. And I said, okay, on one side of it, write down what do you want to get out of Alpha Kappa Psi. This made them think about it and realize, why am I here? And when they thought they were done, I said, flip it over. And I had them write what they were willing to do to get those results. That made them realize that it's a two-way street. You get what you give. Then I had them sign their names and hand it in, which held them accountable. And at this point, it's a matter of finding ways to implement change, to act, and holding them accountable and making them think through that process. Hopefully, you're starting to see a pattern. When you have a chapter problem, acknowledge it, and make sure the chapter leadership acknowledges it as well. Then dig down and find the root issue causing it. After that, discuss as a chapter what changes need to be made. and then finally hand it off to leadership, to those you elected to implement the changes decided upon by the chapter. This system is simple, and it can be applied to almost any problem a chapter faces, and in my experience, it works. We've all learned in our business classes the importance of quantitative data in tracking your progress. How can you measure if progress has been made and if the problems are actually getting fixed? Of course, numbers are great when you're talking about your regional, when you're talking with your regional management team, other chapters, and alumni. I love saying our chapter almost tripled in size. And you should have some numbers that you can throw out to paint your chapter in a good light. However, I think the most honest measurement of progress is your turnout ratio at non-mandatory events. Do your members show up when they aren't forced to? Do they have the pride, the personal connection, and the firm belief that they'll get value pushing them to attend? If your ratio is increasing, you're definitely making progress and moving in the right direction. The important thing to remember as you aim for progress is to try and have controlled growth. Ours was not. So instead of pretending to be an expert, I'll share with you what I know my mistakes were. For one, I didn't change my leadership and management style, either personally or as an executive board, as we grew. You can't have communication with an 80-person chapter the same way you did with a 29-person chapter. Also, as we grew, it became harder for brothers to naturally connect with one another, and we didn't add programs and events focused on helping that process. And finally, we got a little too proud. We were having such great success that we tried to coast off of it, instead of continuing the level of dedication it took us to get there. So, a lot of information, but some things I really want to walk away with is, first, to solve outside problems, you have to first look within. I shared at the very beginning that myself and others I talked to when I first joined felt like we were running from problem to problem, which was frustrating and draining energy from the chapter. We were looking for the quick fix. We would attend a workshop at PBLI about improving professional events, completely ignoring the fact that few showed up to professional events in the first place. No solution is long-lasting unless you tackle the root. Second, you can't sell something you don't know. Take a second and think, and picture this. Could you answer those 5 questions about your chapter? The goal, the mission, the culture, the value, the competitive edge. If you can, do you think your other brothers would answer in a similar way? If you don't, then think about how silly it sounds to try to recruit with that reality, with so many different chapters being sold, and yet that's been the reality for so many chapters, including my own. A quick caveat to this is there is a difference between identity and perception. Of course, everyone is going to perceive the chapter differently because of their own backgrounds and where they come from and what they want to get out of it. What I'm getting at is there should be some common underlying themes in those perceptions, and that's where you find your identity. Looking back at my chapter's identity, you'll see that those statements are intentionally very broad and yet still provide a clear identity when put together. Third, defining who you are involves everyone. Stephen Covey, one of my favorite authors, told a story, and I believe habit 2 of the 7 habits of highly effective people, about a CEO asking for advice on creating a mission statement for the company. Covey's advice was simply to make sure it didn't happen in a boardroom. If you want someone to buy into something, give them ownership to buy into. Make them have a part, have a voice. Fourth, be honest, proud, awkward recruiters. Your identity is your product. Being honest, proud, and awkward is how you sell that product, and that's what recruitment is. It's selling your chapter. It's knowing your audience and knowing what their needs are and being able to portray your chapter as a way of fulfilling those needs. Take our examples that I gave you and then ask other chapters what they do to build a plan customized to you and your target market. Also, stay true to your identity. Don't let all of this work that you're about to do go to waste. Focus on continuing to provide value. It's easy to get caught up in the administrative side of chapter management and focus on numbers and growth and pledging and forget about the actual service we provide. and then keep the identity in ongoing discussion and evolve as a chapter evolves. And the bonus takeaway is utilize your resources. I think the most underutilized resource is the fact that there are over 220 chapters with histories ranging from 1 to 112 years, and yet many of us insist on recreating the wheel, tackling problems in-house. Visiting other chapters opened my eyes to how silly this is, and since then I've made a point to learn how other chapters operate, to both see what I like and can implement and what I don't like and can avoid. I've had so many experiences of going to PBLI or convention or the academy and just being amazed at how differently a chapter is run at different schools and how much I can take away from that, and how the problem I'm having right now, they solved 3 years ago and are now thriving at it. Other chapters are a fantastic resource. And above that, utilizing your resource, I think we're going to start right now with doing some Q&A of asking questions you have and hopefully elaborating a little bit more on what's been talked about so far.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. There's a lot of great information, and it's going to wrap up the content portion of the program like he just said. So now we want to hear from all of you guys listening from around the world. The program is going to be open to your questions and comments, and as stated earlier, feel free to submit the questions via the questions box or on Twitter using the hashtag AKSciChat. Questions are going to be answered in the order they're received, and be sure to introduce yourself, including your chapter and your college or university, before you ask your question. At this time, we're going to start with the first question. That's going to be, how did you make these changes? How can you make them without being in a leadership position?
This is a great question. I'm really glad I got asked. After going to the academy, me and my fellows, shout out to the Omicron class, we stayed in touch through a group me that we created. There were a few times that a fellow shared about their frustration with that issue of not being in leadership and trying to implement change, and they had new ideas and were pumped and really ready to improve things, but were stonewalled by the current leadership. When I run into this issue in other groups, I try to look at it from a president's perspective, which I think is how I'll answer this question. So what really got me behind a suggestion or a new idea from a brother was when they exercised habit 5 of Covey's 7 habits, which is seek first to understand, then to be understood. When they showed me that they've taken the time to learn how things are done currently and why they are done that way, this did a lot for me as a president, because it showed me that they didn't just assume that their idea was better and that I hadn't thought things through. It also showed me that they've done their homework, and so the idea being presented has been thought through and is worth my attention. Also, when they didn't condemn the old way, and this is probably just a pride thing on my part, but I've seen it roadblock others as well. So listen to these two examples. I just listened to a webinar on recruitment and we are doing it all wrong. Here's what we need to do to fix it. Or I just listened to a webinar on recruitment. I got some great ideas that we could potentially implement in our chapter because I think there's a lot of potential to grow in that area. The first example, if I hear that, I'm already starting to get defensive saying, what do you mean I'm doing it wrong? The second example focuses on the potential and didn't come off demanding change, but rather saying, I think the things we could potentially implement in our chapter. So not demanding change, but rather advocating for consideration of a new idea, which also works great when used in election speeches, when focused on potential and growth and just considering new ideas rather than demanding change from people. And the last thing that I've seen really works is when people actually have an idea and they aren't just complaining about how things are done. I remember one rush semester when our brother complained about how we did deliberations. I said, okay, fantastic. How do you want to improve them? And she had 0 ideas. And we were about to have our biggest deliberation to give bids the next morning. And so I said, okay, go home and think about it. And then tomorrow morning before we start, come and me and you will share and discuss any ideas we have. She came back with a phenomenal idea that we implemented that very morning and severely improved deliberations in an area that it was lacking. But once again, going back, when you're not in leadership, the greatest way is to kind of show some respect to the leadership, the people who were elected, and to make sure that you do your homework to understand why things are done first before you suggest a better way. And also don't condemn the old way, but push the potential and just ask for consideration of a new way of thinking. It may be that you're mistaken, or maybe that the leadership's mistaken, but let's have a conversation to figure it out and actually come with an idea on the table. Don't just come complaining about problems. And I think that really helps from a president's standpoint get the attention that it truly deserves.
All right. Natalie wants to know, you talked about how you sent out a survey monkey to kind of figure out what the brothers wanted. She wants to know what kind of questions did you ask in that survey?
Yeah, so it ran the whole gamut. And my idea was to kind of have some quantitative data to do some statistics with. So questions like, on a scale from 1 to 5, how connected do you feel to the executive board? Scale of 1 to 5, how transparent is the executive board? And a lot of that, how is the communication and connection between the leadership and the general members? Also, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being social and 10 being professional, where do you think the chapter is right now? And the following question is, the same scale, where do you want the chapter to be? To kind of figure out, do you want the chapter to focus more on social or more on professional? Because I've seen colleges do it both ways. And then some open-ended questions, like what was your favorite event and why was that your favorite? And what was your least favorite and why? How many events do you usually go to? What kinds of events do you go to? The goal was to basically figure out their experience, both tangibly of going to events and also intangibly of how connected did they feel? Did they feel they already had a buy-in? And how did they perceive the chapter? It's kind of, once again, getting that internal perception, that internal identity from the inside parties. And I can definitely answer in more detail in an email if it's needed.
Great. Garrison wants to know, how do you motivate your active brothers to recruit quality versus quantity?
Great question. It really comes back to that before recruitment, when we kind of go in the room and have that open discussion, and it's kind of remembering that, recruiting quantity isn't necessarily the worst thing. The biggest thing is when it comes time to giving bids, at that point we're focusing on quality. Because sometimes someone might surprise you. Someone at their very first rush event you might write off. But then throughout the process, and when it gets to wherever your final round of recruitment is, by that point they've just blossomed and they now would be a fantastic brother. So I'm not necessarily against quantity in recruitment, but rather focusing on the quality when it comes time to giving bids. And that's having that conversation with the chapter of who is going to take the chapter to the next level. We're not necessarily recruiting what we already have. If your chapter is in a bad position, then don't have somebody have the excuse of, well, we need to let this person in because this, like our brother already does that, so how can we discriminate against somebody when we do it ourselves? And it comes back to, are we trying to improve or are we trying to stay where we are? If you get people into that mindset of recruit someone better than you, recruit someone who's going to take the chapter to the next step. And it's hard, but getting the brothers in that mindset really helps them focus on quality over quantity when it counts, which is when it's time to give bids.
All right, next question is from Keisha. She wants to know, how do you combat contagious negative attitudes on your executive board without resulting directly to removing them?
Great question. So the executive board retreat helped so much, honestly. We kind of became friends at that point, which is weird to say that we weren't friends before, but at the same time, semesters when I haven't done that, I can tell a drastic difference of you just don't feel as connected. Whereas that executive board that went on that retreat and the next year that went on the retreat, we talked about everything. Nothing got untouched. So if we had an issue, we aired it out. Also, one thing I stress to my executive board every semester is we're in a way the parents of the organization. And the rule with parents is you never let the kids see you fight. So if we had a disagreement, we handled it in-house rather than dividing the chapter and taking sides. As far as executive boards who aren't pulling their weight and aren't really contributing, the best thing is to remind them that the chapter put their trust in you. When I was president, what pushed me forward was the chapter trusted me to lead them and to guide them. And that is a huge responsibility and a huge privilege. And honestly, it's a privilege to represent your chapter. And I need to work to earn that privilege. And that should be the mindset of every single executive board, that where you are right now is a privilege. And you have perks with it. You have things upon your resume. You have experiences that will help you later on in life. And you need to put in the effort to earn that. You need to make sure you're in the right mindset. And if they aren't changing, you can go the route of kicking them out, but rather I would just somewhat wait until the elections, and when it comes time to replace them, make sure that those running realize that this is a privilege. So I hope that answers your question. If not, once again, feel free to reach out to me. I can try to give a better response.
Right, next question we have is from Lauren. She wants to know, in a chapter with little to no morale and a general feeling of apathy towards the Brotherhood, where do you start with all of this?
So it starts with simply starting, for lack of a better answer. Starting small. So actually a great resource for this would be Cotter's 8-step process for leading change. This is something we were taught back in the academy, and something that I wish I had known this is all starting. But the 8-step process is create a sense of urgency, build a guiding coalition, form strategic visions and initiatives, enlist volunteer army, enable actions by removing barriers, generate short-term wins, sustain acceleration, and institute change. And that means probably nothing to you right now, but you can definitely get a ton more information just from one Google search. But basically, create a sense of urgency. The chapter should know that there's no morale and there's apathy, but no one's blind to that. And then build a guiding coalition. That's probably your leadership, your executive boards. Who's going to be that spark to get people excited? Who's going to take that leap of faith and start putting some effort and energy into this organization? And it may be just 2 or 3 of you at the beginning, but get that starting coalition, form some visions and some initiatives, take some form, and once they have some power and some guidance, enlist a volunteer army, get general membership involved, and enable action by removing barriers, meaning that give them tangible ways to improve. Rather than saying, hey, our executive board is going to improve our chapter in these ways, say, hey, here's some ideas we have. We want your input. Then once you have it, say, okay, we need somebody to do this and somebody to do this. And the hope is then that because they were kind of in the process of creating those ideas and creating those next action items, that they'll want to see them through to fruition, rather than the executive board saying, hey, we need to do A, B, and C. Who's going to volunteer to do A, B, and C? It's hard to get volunteers. When the chapter says we need to do A, B, and C, you have a slightly higher success rate of getting chapter membership to get involved in those actions. Creating short-term wins, that's simply just have short-term goals. For us, the work we did over the summer was enough to spark and get rid of that apathy. So it really is, the short-term win was having that recruitment and having that great pledge class. So start small and grow from there is the best advice I can give.
All right, the next question we have is going to be kind of a culture-based question. It comes from Paige. She wants to know that her chapter struggles with defining the line between active and inactive brothers. When the brothers are financially inactive, should they remove them from the chapter GroupMe or their Facebook pages? Should they allow them into their AK site office on campus? Where should you kind of draw the line?
So we drew the line, and we had an accountability system to do this, but with the chapter bylaws, once somebody's 3 days late, they're in bad standing. There actually doesn't even need to be a vote for it. It happens instantaneously. And if I'm wrong, that Mackenzie will definitely correct me. But where we drew the line was we had 2 group meets. We had an official one and an unofficial one. The unofficial one was like, hey, who wants to go get Chipotle? The official one was our actual announcements. And as soon as you were voted into bad standing or put into bad standing for any reason, you immediately exited from that official group meet. You weren't allowed into rituals and any other event that required good standing. We didn't have an AKSI office. That sounds amazing, but if we did, they would not have been allowed in that. It was basically the official structures of AKSI they were no longer allowed to. But we didn't cut ties completely because we wanted them to come back. We didn't want them to feel exiled, but rather saying, hey, like, it's almost like a warning. Like when you're on the highway and you go off the edge and you hear that rumbling strip of saying, hey, get your act together, wake up and get back to being active. We're still your brothers, but we want to see more from you. I saw taking people out of the official elements, but not the unofficial ones, kind of like did that.
Good answer. The next one we have is going to be from Sharon. And she says, what do you suggest if it seems like most of the chapter is careless to bringing up these issues to the chapter and in being involved?
Careless as in they don't care, or careless as in clumsy, I guess would be my question back. Can you repeat the question, Mackenzie?
Yeah. What do you suggest if it seems that most of the chapter is careless in bringing up these issues to the chapter and in being involved?
Notice I'm assuming you mean careless as in they don't have the interest. And it comes down to, once again, finding a way to create that sense of urgency. And for my chapter, what worked was starting small, the executive board. If your executive board is the one that doesn't really care, then one, you need to vote differently. But two, then do some research with that Cotter's 8-step process and get some ideas of ways to create that sense of urgency. And once again, talk to your resource manager, a resource coordinator, and the Heritage Center chapter advisor, and just other chapters. Everybody goes through these issues at some point, and oftentimes people find some really great solutions. And really talking to other chapters has been my best resource of finding ideas when I haven't had the answer. And to that one, I necessarily don't have an answer other than starting small, which is what I did with the executive board and having them have energy and then letting that spread through the chapter.
Great. The next question is going to be from Alita, and she says that they are a brand new chapter, and this is going to be their first recruitment season, recruiting as a chapter instead of a colony. So how would you recommend improving their name recognition at their university?
So I would definitely, on any signs you have or any billboards, put Alpha Kappa Psi and then professional co-ed fraternity. Those are the biggest things. I remember when we were tabling, depending on who we had standing out front, if we had girls or guys, we attracted either girls or guys. People just assume that it's either an all male or all female. And when they see business fraternity, it really puts them off if you're not a business major. But putting professional kind of attracts the right crowd, and putting co-ed, it really doesn't turn anybody away that wouldn't be turned away just because it's Greek life. So by kind of like holding their hand of not only doing name recognition, but also identity recognition of who you're actually catering for. And you also need to decide, who are you catering for? Talk to your colony or chapter and say, what is the target we're going for? Are we going to stay in the business school? Are we able to do that? Or do we want to branch out? And starting out, if you have a large business school, it might not be a bad idea to kind of focus your efforts and kind of make the most out of your resources rather than trying to make them stretch. But once again, my suggestion would be to kind of hold their hand. Don't let them make assumptions as to who you are, but explicitly say what Alpha Kappa Psi is and what your chapter offers.
All right, next question is from Tanya from the Rokai chapter. She says that there are a lot of members become complacent and uninvolved after just a few semesters of being active, particularly with seniors. What advice do you have in regards to keeping that strong membership retention?
So yeah, great question. When I was a senior, if I wasn't president, it would have been hard for me, honestly, because as a senior, you're dealing with internships. You're dealing with entering the real world. You're almost always working a job. You're taking your hardest classes, and it's hard. You need to realize that people who have been in the chapter for a while want different things. For instance, after my second year, I never went to another resume workshop because I'd been to 30 of them already. So change your programming and almost like focus on them. What we try to do is we have 2 tracks of professional events. One's for new members and one's for older members. And we also, somebody pitched the idea, which we haven't implemented yet, but it was a great idea, that give seniors a chance to give back. Let them lead a workshop. Let them give a presentation. They have hopefully learned a lot during their time there. And instead of asking them to continue learning, which they absolutely should do, but give them a chance to kind of showcase themselves, showcasing what they've learned. And hopefully that will show your younger members just the growth potential. And then also having some flexibility. We came up with an accountability program with a point system where you got points for being involved and you lost points for breaking rules. And that allowed for flexibility. So if you missed a mandatory event, but you had gone to a ton of professional events, it balanced out and allowed them to kind of like prioritize in a way that worked for their lifestyle rather than demanding them to fit into this cookie cutter mold. Because as seniors and as older brothers, it's just harder to do that. It really is.
All right, next question comes from Paige at Omega Xi, but I'm seeing it from a couple other people as well. How can you kind of change your perception on campus, particularly if you're seen as being stuck up, even though that's not what you're truly like?
So I was about to say, are you stuck up? And that seems harsh, but it's having that. If this is the perception that a lot of people have of you, realize that while it might not be true, something is causing it. And it might be something unintentional, but something is giving me an impression that your chapter is stuck up. And I'm not saying that you are, but just realize that perception is reality. So what I would do is people who say that you're stuck up, ask them to explain why. Eventually, hopefully, you'll get some ideas of things that you haven't have noticed. And then go back to the beginning of this presentation and figure out, do you have a strong identity to combat this? Because without it, it's impossible. If you create that strong identity, that central, unified identity, then you can start pumping that out to the community by recruiting with it, by exemplifying it, by having your events exemplify it, and then just by sheer willpower and by sheer effort, it'll start to combat this stuck up thing, kind of like thing you've got going for you. But I would definitely ask around and try to figure out what's causing it, because something is. And I'm not saying it's you being stuck up, but something is causing it.
All right, next question is from Brian at Iota Pi. He says, with so many members in a chapter, how do you try to condense all of those different opinions into a concise identity to describe your whole chapter?
Time and a lot of discussion. It actually wasn't incredibly hard as you might think. One thing is having it all in front of you, of like getting, rather than just like talking about it, but having people write things down and then going back later and looking over it all. And it's kind of easy to see the pattern. So ways to do it would be have some way to have them give input. Then go back and find the common themes. You know, usually find like 3 or 4 common themes and then present to the chapter saying, hey, here's like the 3 or 4 reoccurring things we kept on seeing. Let's start here and try and narrow it down to 1. So you're right, with a large number, it's impossible. But if you can somehow get a tangible way of viewing all of those different opinions, you're going to see the common themes, and you can start whittling it down from there. My rule is always 3 things. Whenever you voted on anything, I gave 3 options, whether it's T-shirts or actually it was mostly often T-shirt designs. We give 3 options, and you picked 1. 2 seems too many, 4 is too much. But if you can kind of get the input and narrow it down to 3 common themes and go from there, that seemed to work for us.
All right. Now, it is 8 o'clock, so it is technically the end of the time that we have allotted, but we do have quite a few questions left that we're going to try and get in, just a few more. Just note, if you do get your question not answered, feel free to address it to Patrick or anyone at the Heritage Center so we can help you guys out with your questions. Next question is going to be from Chisabam, and he says, how did you really get started with preparing to gather all this information to present about the identity and the problems within your chapter?
So I'll do with the problems first, the identity. The problem was, honestly, people are thinking it. I wasn't, when I said that, hey, we need to work on our identity and like really come up with like a strong one, it didn't really blow anybody's minds. They were kind of like, yeah, you're right. It was just no one had ever addressed it before. Everyone kind of focused on the surface level issues rather than digging deep down. It's one of those things like once you say it out loud, people are like, you know what, you're right. We need to work on it. So it wasn't really hard. And once again, started small. Started with the executive board. And then we came back to the chapter. We said, hey, during the summer, this is what we really thought about and what we talked about. Here's the problems we're seeing, and here's a basis, some ideas we have. What are your inputs? What do you like? What don't you like? What would you like to add? As far as giving the actual identity, like I said, I gave that PowerPoint at the end of the semester, Brotherhood ROI, and basically what was in that PowerPoint was I gave some of the results of the survey, and some of them were really shocking, which was kind of cool to kind of like have that wow factor. But I gave some results, some tangible results. I gave some analysis of the responses I got in the discussions. I shared with like what was talking about in the post-it notes in the talk in my apartment. And then I started to create, I kind of gave some tangible changes. So I mentioned that the retreat the executive board went on, the next year the entire chapter was going to go on it. I mentioned how we were going to revamp professional events to be more in line with that a diverse journey to success identity that we found, and just kind of gave tangible changes that people could then see and then get that short-term wins and acceleration, right? Institute the change as talked about in the Cotter's 8-step process.
All right, next question is from Lisa at Sacred Heart. She says, what do you think is the most helpful way to reach out to students at school about joining AKSI?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, what is the most helpful way to reach out to students at your school to join AKSI?
You say most helpful. I'm sorry, the connection broke up.
Yeah, the most helpful way to reach out to students on campus.
So the most helpful way is just getting yourself out there. So what we would do is, and what actually the chapter is doing this coming semester, the new president thought of this idea, is they're having an AKSI Awareness Week, where the week before Rush, they're not having any events, just they're flooding the campus with our name and our image, wearing T-shirts all the time, doing a lot of marketing, flyering. We have televisions around the campus, so getting promotional stuff on there, just so that our name is like everywhere. So that when Rush Week comes and people say, hey, AKSI event this Monday night, they're like, oh yeah, I saw that everywhere. Maybe I'll go check it out. Or they might say, oh my gosh, that was that annoying group everywhere. I'm definitely not checking them out. It might be a hit or miss. But that's our idea at this point, is to just flood the market to the best of your resources, but also focusing on your target market. So we're definitely going to promote in the business college more so than the music college. But at the same time, the general areas of the union and the cafeterias and stuff like that, definitely hitting those, but kind of like strategically flooding the market to where we want to recruit before recruitment, so that the first thing they're hearing about Alpha Kappa Psi isn't when we're asking them to come to our information session or our potluck or anything like that.
All right, this is going to be the last question for the night, and it comes from Courtney at Towson. She says, how do you emphasize to pledges that retention is important?
So that comes back to recruitment, and it also comes back to giving bids. Hopefully you're giving bids to quality pledges, people who already want to be there. And then it's honestly during the pledging process, you're going to have pledges who aren't really carrying their weight, and that definitely brings the pledge class down. If you can find a way to almost highlight that, and without shaming the person doing it, because you don't want to do that in a public field, because that's going to turn them away, but saying, like, realize how this impacts your experience when people aren't active, when they're not putting their full effort into it. In the chapter, it's just the same. It's showcasing those brothers who have been here for a while. It's showcasing the impact that they've had and showing the growth. Give brothers the opportunity to come in and say, I've been here for 3 years, and look at what I've accomplished. So it's kind of like, it doesn't work to say, just shame, saying don't leave, or you can't leave, or you must stay here, but rather just showing them the reason why they should and let them make the decision. And also showing them the impact it has when you don't. And then once again, let them make the decision rather than trying to force it.
All right, so that is all the time that we do have for the day. I want to thank all of your participants for joining in and callers for your great questions and comments. For any follow-up questions or conversations, or for any of the questions that we didn't get to tonight, feel free to contact Patrick with the information provided on the screen. Finally, we do have a lot of upcoming resources and programs coming up for this next academic year. They're listed on the aksi.org website, as well as supplemental materials and a bunch of additional resources. Additionally, also reach out to your resource coordinator. They can help direct you to any specific resources to help with anything that your chapter specifically needs. If you do have any suggestions for future webinar or e-learning topics, please send them to education@aksi.org. Again, I want to thank our presenter, Patrick, for his time and valuable insights, and thank you for joining us.